My topic tonight is, what is good about the gospel? And I'm going to take you there, and we got a passage we need to get to, and I'm going to take you there, but I'm going to take you on a little different route than you probably ever traveled before. And before I get started with that, I just want to ask, how many kiddos do we have here tonight? They're 12 and under. Wave at me. Raise your hand. Wave. Okay, well, I'm going to do, now listen, kiddos, this is what I'm going to do, is every so often I'm going to have a no adults allowed moment, okay? So I'm going to ask you kiddos a question, and I'm going to start out by saying no adults allowed. So you listen in for that, and when I do, then you can answer that question. Okay? And you don't have to raise your hand. It's not like school. You just shout it out to me, okay? So, no adults allowed. Who was born in Bethlehem? Jesus. Very good. See, we got some smart kids here tonight. Okay, well, I can't sing, but I am going to start with a rhyme. And most of you probably know this rhyme. It goes like this. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. So I want you to take that rhyme and just park it in the back of your mind while we talk through some things. I have had the privilege in the last several years of getting to know some folks in the recovery community. And I love folks in recovery for many reasons, but one of the reasons why I have just felt so blessed by getting to know folks in recovery is they're completely unpretentious. You know, they've hit bottom. They don't have to prove anything to anybody anymore. And they're just honest and real and raw. And I really appreciate that. Anyway, the folks I've gotten to know in recovery have been fighting addictions of all different flavors. And one of the addictions that some of these folks have been fighting is heroin addiction. And I don't know how much you know about heroin, but heroin is really nasty stuff. You know, besides the fact that if you're on heroin, you're just not able to be present. You know, your work suffers, your family, your relationships. And people on heroin do all kinds of crazy things that they might not do if they were sane and not struggling with a drug. You know, I know just sweet people who have been in jail or in prison because of what the drug drove them to do. I just read a couple things online. I'll read this. Jim was 21 years old, usually spent his evenings drinking beer with friends. He'd already experimented with heroin, so when his friends offered him a line to sniff, he accepted. 15 minutes after inhaling, he passed out, dropped into a deep coma, which lasted for more than 2 months. Today, he's confined to a wheelchair, unable to write, barely able to read. Whatever dreams and aspirations he once had are gone. Now I ask you, why would somebody take a substance that has so many dangers? I've had friends, vibrant, alive, beautiful people one day, and the next day they were gone, overdosed on heroin. What would cause somebody to do that? Why? 15-year-old addict, he puts it this way. When you first shoot up, you'll most likely puke, feel repelled, but soon you'll try it again. It will cling to you like an obsessed lover, the rush of the hit and the way you'll want more, as if you were being deprived of air. That's how it will trap you. And so my question is, why? You know, if this stuff is so dangerous, if it has so many side effects, if it causes so much pain and sorrow, why? Why would somebody engage in it? That's a very important question. So I want you to ponder that why question. And let's do a no adults allowed moment. No adults allowed. This is a tough one. See if any of the kiddos know this one. Who climbed the sycamore tree? Zacchaeus! Very good. Don't we have some smart kids here? I love it. Very good. Very good. Okay, well, now the rest of you are probably thinking Dwight Clough is doing an anti-drug speech. And that is really strange for a Lent service. But maybe they do things differently here at the Wesleyan Bible Church. Well, fasten your seatbelts because I'm about to take a hard right turn. And I'm going to talk about my drug of choice. See, you could put a dose of heroin in front of me, and it could sit there for a year, and I would never touch it because I have absolutely no interest in it. But I do have my drug of choice. And my drug of choice is affirmation, approval, praise. You know, it kind of works like this. I'm a professional writer. And so I'll write something, and then I'll take it to the nearest person, which is usually my wife, and I'll just put it in front of her. I just wrote this. Would you like to read it? And I'll just sit there and I'll be hungry for whatever words of praise she might want to lavish on me. And unfortunately, usually when she reads the stuff that I've written, she says, Dwight, this sentence doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I'm immediately hurt. And I'm a little angry. And, you know, I just kind of stomp off. And then, you know, I come back and I think about it and I realize, you know, she's right. She has a very good eye for good writing. And when she says a sentence doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. And so I rewrite it, and it's a whole lot better. But now, you know, I'm a professional writer. This is what I do for a living. I know how to write. I'm just as much a professional as the plumber who fixed your pipes or the doctor who removed your aunt's appendix. You know, I know what I'm doing. And I know good writing. And, you know, I may not be a John Steinbeck or a William Shakespeare, but, you know, I don't always hit the ball out of the park. But when I swing the bat, I usually hit the ball. You know, I know what I'm doing. And so why, I ask you, why would I need somebody to pump me up with praise over my writing? Why would I need somebody to tell me that I did a good job? Why do I need all this approval? What's going on? This is a really important question. And when we understand the answer to this question, everything changes. We will read the Bible differently. We will look at God differently. We will look at the people around us differently. We will look at ourselves differently because this changes everything. Now I'm going to take another turn here and I'm going to talk about your drug of choice. Okay? And before I do, I want to say a couple of things. Number one, I don't go into this to make you feel guilty because there's enough guilt to go around. You don't need any from me. And I don't go into this to get you to second guess yourself. Okay? We don't need that. The only reason I go into this is because I just want to reassure everyone in this room that we're all in the same boat. We're all on the same page. We're all walking the same path. We're all in this together. Okay? Now, I don't know you. I don't know you well enough to know what your drug of choice is, because there are hundreds and hundreds of drugs of choice. But I can mention a few. What do I do with my notes? Might be food, sometimes our bodies are full, but our souls are empty. And so we keep eating. I look down every so often and say to myself, how did this get here? It might be the status that comes from owning certain things. It's nice to own a nice car, but does the nice car own you? What would happen inside if you had to drive a rust bucket for the next 2 years? Would you be okay with yourself? Might be porn, the pixel women who never say no. Might be alcohol, the drink or two just makes the pain go away, and there's just kind of this nagging voice inside that says, maybe I have a problem with this, and we just kind of push it down and pretend that it's not there. Or, here's one, worship music. Now, should we sing songs to God? Absolutely. Yes, we should. But some people are worship junkies, worship music junkies. And what I mean by that is they're getting something from the music that they should be getting from God. A few years ago when this song came out, I'm getting back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you, God. When I first heard that, I thought, duh. Doesn't everybody know that? But then as I reflected on it, that's very profound. So anyway, there are hundreds of drugs of choices. Status in the community. Religious activities can be a drug of choice. A new romance. Crack cocaine, chasing the dollar, climbing the corporate ladder, television, or smartphone. And the list goes on and on. And now these things are not, all of them are not bad. Some of them are just fine. But they can take a place in our life that they were never intended to take. And so my question again is why? Why are we doing this? Why do we need this drug of choice, whatever it is for each of us? So think about that while I try to think of another question for the kiddos. Okay, no adults allowed. What did Jesus feed to the 5,000? Bread and fish. Very good. Hey, I love it. I love it. Well, what I want to suggest tonight is that all of us have something in common with the heroin addict. And that is, all of us have a problem we're trying to fix, a pain we're trying to medicate, a hurt that we're trying to heal. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And we have fallen as a race. Humanity has fallen. And every one of us carries inside us the pain of that fall. It comes in the form of these little voices inside that haunt us, that say things like, you'll never be good enough. You'll never be loved. It's all your fault. You'll be found out. You're not safe. You're not worth protecting. I mean, these are lies. And we know up here that they're not true. We know that they're lies. And yet down here, somehow, they feel true. We have to stop seeing our drug of choice or our sins as problems. They are solutions to the underlying problem. The underlying problem is the pain that we have as a result of the fall. And every one of us is infected. Nobody gets through this life unscathed. Every one of us is in the same boat. You know, I did a talk like this a while ago, and just to illustrate it, I had a table up front, and I had some coffee cups and a hammer. And I just kind of went at these coffee cups with the hammer just to kind of illustrate what it's like to live in a fallen world. And I was thinking about doing that again tonight. The last time I did it, I cut my hands all to pieces, so I thought I would skip it tonight. But anyway, maybe you can just imagine those coffee cups breaking into pieces, because that is life in a fallen world. So many people trying to find their worth in the backseat of an automobile, climbing the corporate ladder, driving a better car, chasing a romance, chasing the dollar, a beautiful home in the suburbs, religious activity, try-hard religion. It's because of the pain we feel, the fear, anxiety, panic attacks, the feeling of being left all alone, abandoned, isolated, friendless, the secret corners of shame, feeling like garbage, hopelessness, life is out of control, reasons that we can't forgive, and grief that won't go away. I mean, pain comes in all different flavors, but we all feel it. We're all touched by it. We live in a fallen world. And we have these drugs of choice. And, you know, all of these drugs of choice, they're like gods with a little g, because we look to them and hope that they'll solve our problems. We hope that they'll heal our hurts, but they don't. And you know, when God said way back in the Old Testament and the Ten Commandments, "You shall not have any other gods before me," I used to think that God was kind of on an ego trip when he said that. But he didn't say it primarily for his own sake. He said it primarily for our sake, because those other gods do not fix anything. They only make our life worse. So let me ask you a question. Where does all this pain come from? You think about that while I think of another question for the kiddos. Let me think of a really, really hard one. Okay, there was a guy who... Oh, right. No adults allowed. Thank you. No adults allowed. We don't want any of the adults answering this. There was a guy who was in a really, really big boat, and he had a bunch of animals in... Ah, you got me. Okay, well, where does this pain come from? You know, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do this. But if I dug deep enough into any of your lives, I would find some of the places where this pain comes from. I'll tell you one place in my life, okay? It's kind of an embarrassing story, but I'll tell you anyway. My first day of kindergarten, okay? I was a little 4.5-year-old boy, and I was really, really, really shy. And I just kind of didn't know how the system worked. And I had to use the bathroom. And I didn't know that you had to raise your hand and ask. And so I just kept waiting for this thing to be over with that my parents took me to. And I waited, and I held out as long as I could, but I didn't quite make it. And I have a vivid memory of sitting on the floor with wet pants, with children in a big ring around me, pointing at me and laughing. And so I ask you, what lessons did I learn on my first day of school? I learned that I don't belong. I learned that I'm not okay. I learned that there's something wrong with me. And now as a 61-year-old man, I know up in my head that those things aren't true. But sometimes they still feel true inside. And all of us have experiences like that. There's points of pain in every life here. All of us have learned lessons that God never intended for us to learn. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And all the king's horses, all of our drugs of choice, all of our little gods could not put Humpty together again. We've fallen. I had one man tell me, when he was growing up, when he was a little boy, he had a bedwetting problem. And his parents dealt with that by dressing him up as a girl and by, when they had company, making him sit under the table and eat his meal from the floor. I mean, we lived in a really, really messed up world. And all of us have been touched. Into this messed up world comes Jesus. And in John chapter 10, starting in verse 7, we read these words. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. What is Jesus saying? What is good about the gospel? Jesus is saying, I'm offering you an alternative. I'm offering you a different way out. I'm offering you release from this pain that comes from the fall. I am offering you something different than your little gods who can't solve your problems. I am offering you life to the full. You know, it's kind of like this. It's kind of like taking a penny, walking down or driving down to the car dealership and trading it in for a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or a Rolls Royce or Cadillac or whatever your car of choice is. Or actually, it's kind of like this. It's kind of like taking a rabid dog down to the car dealership and turning it in for your Lamborghini. This is the deal that Jesus is offering you. He's saying you can trade up. You know, the thief has already been here. He's already stolen. He's already killed. He's already destroyed. But I'm here now, and I'm going to turn all of that around for you. And all you have to do is bring to me your drugs of choice. All you have to do is bring to me your pain, and I will fix it. I will give you life, and I will give you life to the full. So, how does that work? Well, it starts here. It starts with us just saying, Jesus, this is something we can do right now if you want. Jesus, I invite you in. I invite you into my life. You can be whoever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do. You can take charge of this mess and make it into something beautiful. That's the starting point. That's opening the front door of our lives to God. But it doesn't end there. There's a lot more to gaining this abundant life, this life to the full, than just opening the front door. So let me talk about that. But no adults allowed. Okay. This is a really hard one. See if you know this one. You might need to get some help. Who gave us the 10 Commandments? God and Moses. You got both answers right. Very good. Very good. Okay, where am I? Oh, okay. I have a question for you. Why does the abundant life elude so many people? You know, I have a friend, his wife left him. And her reason for leaving is she wanted to go dancing. And on the surface, that makes absolutely no sense, right? She abandons her life partner. She abandons her 4 little kids just because she wants to move her body around on a dance floor. But if you look underneath, it makes all kinds of sense, doesn't it? Her little God of her husband, her little God of her 4 children, couldn't meet her needs, couldn't heal her hurts, couldn't relieve her pain, and so she was searching for a new God. She thought she'd find it on the dance floor. I can guarantee you she did not. And she will keep on searching until she finds the only one who can give her life to the full. You know, we think that we open the door of our lives to God and then everything is going to be fine. Well, no, that's just the first step. You know, there are many rooms in the house of your soul. Many, many rooms. And Jesus knocks at each one. And we have to make the decision with each one. Are we going to open the door or not? You know? Let me just give you some examples. Couple stories, and then we'll wrap up. I'm self-employed, okay? And so sometimes that's great, and sometimes I have all the money I need, and sometimes I kind of run out a month before the money comes in. And, you know, I was in one of those situations once where I was just I'd ran out a month, and I was actually getting behind on my mortgage, and this is not a good thing. And I knew from experience that God would provide, so I wasn't too worried about that. But I just had this sneaking feeling inside that even though God could provide, that He wouldn't. That I had made some kind of mistake, and He was just going to make me sit in it. You know? And so I was praying about this to God, and He brought to mind this thing that happened when I was a kid. My dad was in the military, he was in the Air Force, and he was deployed remotely on a number of occasions for like a year or longer. And so I was like 8 years old, and I liked playing with my dad's tools, you know? I just like to pretend that I knew something about tools, and those of you who know me, that's really funny. And so I was playing with his tools while he was on this remote deployment. And then I realized that my dad was just really persnickety about how his tools got put away. And I had no clue what his system was. And I knew that he was coming back after a year, and I was so afraid that I was going to be in major trouble with my dad. And and when my dad came back, I actually did get in trouble, you know, so it was a realized fear. anyway, I was processing this with the Lord, and the Lord just spoke to me. He just, not an audible voice or anything spooky like that, but just inside my heart. He said to me, he says, Dwight, said, your dad did the best he could with the parenting toolbox that he had. But I'm a different kind of parent. And I have different tools in my toolbox. And when you make a mistake, I don't make you sit in it. I don't yell at you for it. Instead, I coach you. I teach you what you need to know. I help you to fix the problem, whatever the problem is. And I still didn't have the money to pay the mortgage, but my anxiety went from like way up here to way down here. And in its place, I just had all this peace inside, this abundant life to the full peace. And sure enough, a few days later, a job came in or whatever, somehow the money came in, I got my mortgage up to date, got my bills up to date, and everything was fine. But I needed to learn that lesson. Sometimes we're in the middle of problems and we're saying, God, please take my problems away. Please take my problems away. And God is saying, wait a second. There's something you got to learn here. Then I'll take the problem away. But first, learn the lesson. So anyway, that's one example. Let's see. What else can I tell you? Should I tell the wife being sick story? My wife, she's a sweetheart. We've been married for over 40 years. She's my best friend. I love her dearly. It used to be, though, that whenever she got sick, I got angry. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dwight, you're being a jerk. And I was. I was being a real jerk. She'd be sick, very vulnerable, and I'd be saying things like, when are you going to get better? Why are you making me do all your work? And stuff like that. Which was really wrong for me to do. And I knew it was wrong, and I was trying to change. I was trying to be patient and gentle and kind, but it just wasn't coming through at all. And then God dealt with me on that. I realized that when I was growing up, rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, I never felt safe around my dad. And so when my mom was sick, I felt like I wasn't safe. There was nobody there to protect me. And I just kind of grew up with this message that when the woman in your life is sick, you're not safe. And so I felt all these yucky feelings, which I covered over with anger. And as the Lord just straightened that out inside, I am safe when the woman in my life is sick. Then it's like, And the next time she got sick, it's like, she's sick. Let me help her. It wasn't that I tried hard to be patient or kind or loving. It's just that God did a work in me. And I was a changed person. I tell you, I'm a vastly different person than I was a couple of decades ago. And I give 100% of the credit for that to God. It doesn't belong to me at all. It's just all God's work that He does in us. One more story and then we will wrap up. About 1:30 in the morning, one morning, the police came to our door and they said, your son is in the emergency room and things don't look good. I think you'll want to get there right away. And so my wife and I got out of bed. We drove to the emergency room. And when we got there, there was a man on a table with all kinds of wires and tubes coming out of him. And somebody said to me, "That's your son." There was a woman standing next to him weeping. And what do you do? What do you do when life picks you up like a rag doll and throws you against the wall? His brain had been deprived of oxygen. He had a brain bleed. The paramedics did not expect him to live through the night. He did live through the night. Matter of fact, Cindy Crawford came to the hospital the next day, and I remember her standing at the door with my wife, and I was standing next to the bed near my son, and she said, this is every parent's nightmare, isn't it? I had to nod, yeah, it is. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of my story. So we had to get our other children. One was working an overnight shift, and we got the other two awake and out of bed, and we were traveling in 2 cars. Med-Flight we had to be moved from one emergency room down to University Hospital in Madison. Med-Flight wasn't available, so an ambulance took him. Anyway, we got our act together, and we went in 2 cars to the University Hospital. And my wife had the other 3 kids, and I was by myself. I was driving down East Washington Avenue. Just this surreal experience, not knowing if my son would live or die, not knowing if I would even see him alive again. And when I got to about where Ella's Deli used to be, on East Washington Avenue, I just felt God whisper a little something into my ear. And that was, I'm going to use this for good. And now, if you would have told me that, I would have been insulted. Nothing personal, but I would have been insulted. But you didn't tell me. God told me. And suddenly, everything changed. And I still didn't know if he would live through the night. I still didn't know if he would have permanent brain damage, as the doctors were predicting. But I just had a peace that I couldn't explain. Peace that the Bible says passes all understanding. And why? Why did I have that peace? It's because Jesus Christ said, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it to the full. Jesus gives life. And even when our life is complete chaos and a complete mess, Jesus is still there to give us abundant life. Anyway, I will let you know that even though my son was in a coma for 3 days and intensive care for 5, he did recover. He doesn't have permanent brain damage. I actually talked to him today, so he's fine and well. Thank the Lord. But it took away from that something that I never would have had otherwise. God's presence, God's kindness, God's grace in a time of trouble. I just want to invite you tonight to open those rooms of your heart to Jesus. Find the door where Jesus is knocking and say yes. Open the door. Let him in. Let him be who he wants to be in your life. He is the gate. He is the gateway to abundant life, eternal life,